Thanks, and welcome to the Wednesday, January 24th, 2024 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. I'll call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with a roll call. Commissioner Woodyear.
Present.
Commissioner Parna.
Present.
Commissioner Van Nyman.
Present.
Vice Chair Weston.
Present.
And I'm Chair Sherry Nichols, and Commissioner Sheffrin is excused. I also want to recognize staff who have extended their workday to support us this evening. Present are Jeff Churchill, Chris Wyatt, Glenn Coyle, Lauren Alpert, Josh Mueller, and Ian Lefcourt. Look for a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the agenda is approved. We also have meeting minutes from January 10th, 2024, and from the Wayback Machine, July 12th, 2023. There was an error in the description of the approval for the PC report for the Economic Vitality Element and Park Element Plan. So we revised the minutes. So we need a motion to approve both of these.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And these minutes are approved. This is the point in the meeting where we provide public comment for any item that is not the subject of a public hearing. And we have two people signed up.
And first is Devin Kay.
Testing. Okay. Good evening, Redmond Planning Commissioners and staff. My name is Devin Kellogg. I'm here tonight to share how climate chaos relates to housing affordability and how Redmond families and beyond, and what we can all do about it. For decades, I have been fortunate to live on Ed Hill with my husband and our two kids. There are so many things we all love about living and working in Redmond. We hope it will be our forever home. However, as we are in the low to mid-income group and on a budget, our biggest challenge has been managing the health effects, monthly bills, and home maintenance costs related to our failing fossil appliances and increasing extreme weather patterns. Along with developing chronic asthma from a toxic combo of indoor combustion fumes, mold, and smoke, depending on the season, there have been times during our scorching heat waves I got so overheated, my hands and feet swelled, and I was on the verge of going to the ER. As lucky as we are to have a place to live, where do you go when your sanctuary becomes a death trap? Plus, these rapid freeze, thaw, and heat extremes are wreaking havoc on roads, pipes, landscaping, and livelihoods. I don't even want to think about what might happen to all the gas lines if a major earthquake were to happen. The irony is that these fossil-fueled appliances aren't just unhealthy, unsafe, costly, and ineffective in today's climate. Their fuel is, in fact, a major driver of the increasing harmful effects we are experiencing. Even cold snaps like the one last week are consistent with a rapidly warming Arctic region pushing cool air southward. Methane, the primary components of natural gas in our appliances, have been deemed by the experts to be a critical pollutant for us to reduce this decade to avoid worsening climate effects. Plus, there are so many better options now, such as electric heat pumps that are cleaner, safer, more efficient, and also provide refreshing, life-saving cooling in the summer. Thanks to the Federal Inflation Reduction Act and Energy Smart Eastside, my family has come up with a plan that will improve our living conditions and save us money in the long run. But it has involved extensive effort and daunting upfront costs that are difficult to manage in our position. I bring this up to ask you, please, do not lock other resource-limited folks into a similar situation. It is far less expensive and healthier for everyone to simply build green from the start. In addition, we are all becoming familiar with the growing list of harmful climate effects. But have you considered how these effects are also impacting housing affordability overall? During recent discussions, we learned that projects are not penciling out anywhere right now due to two main reasons: interest rates and increased costs. Some of this may simply be normal market cycles, as you've all surmised. However, some costs will not cycle, but will instead continue along with our warming trajectory. For example, according to the PBS Weathered series, the record number of billion-dollar disasters in the U.S. over the past several years has impacted the production and availability of building materials, stretched labor markets thin, and dramatically increased risk assessments, driving up construction and insurance costs everywhere. Some major insurers have even stopped issuing policies in certain areas. Many in my extended family have lived this experience. One way or another, we will all have to contend with these ever-increasing impacts and related costs. That is, unless or until we collectively change course on the underlying causes, such as ending our reliance on methane gas. The buck stops here, as they say. Here are the top 3 ways responsible, forward-thinking cities are putting us on a healthier and more sustainable trajectory. 1, increasing performance standards towards binding net zero targets, like Seattle, Boston, New York City, and others. Implementing increased indoor air quality standards, Ashland, Oregon, California Bay Area. Limiting fossil hookup subsidies and promoting green incentives for all buildings, not just an elective subset, like in Oregon. New energy efficiency requirements in our state building codes will help. But if we are serious about sustainability, affordability, and equity here in Redmond, we can and should do more to improve the outcomes for all of us. I urge you to consider this as you work through related policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have David M.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Morton, 19934 Northeast Union Hill Road, Redmond, 98053. Redmond's municipal code mentions a special regulation pertaining to the treatment and storage of hazardous materials in Redmond's commercial, business park, manufacturing park, and industrial zones. The special regulation stipulates that hazardous materials shall not cause fumes, unpleasant odors, or harm to others in the course of normal handling. I'm concerned that Redmond residents and businesses may get insufficient help from the city when they experience harmful effects from inhaling fumes and unpleasant odors caused by businesses allowed to handle hazardous materials in these zones. It's not just heavy industries that cause air pollution. Light industries, such as the following, can pose serious health consequences for those who are downwind from them. Auto body shops, dry cleaners, electroplating operations, fiberglass fabrication operations, and paint and coating manufacturing and operations. Does Redmond have established mechanisms for addressing this issue and for encouraging businesses to comply with the city's special regulation, which prohibits businesses from handling hazardous materials in a manner that causes fumes, unpleasant odors, or harm to others? I requested a response to this question from the city 8 days ago, but have not yet received a reply. Perhaps Redmond does not enforce the regulation. While state and federal regulations place limits on the amount of emissions from polluting operations, dangerous releases of toxic air pollution can occur if an operation is not in compliance with regulations. Compliance inspections are often done only annually, often consist of just a brief checklist to ensure that an operation and maintenance log is being kept and that essential pollution prevention equipment is on site. After demonstrating compliance on the day of inspection, unethical businesses may return to non-compliant work practices. Some may believe that businesses operating in Redmond are fully compliant year-round with regulations to reduce air, water, and soil pollution. However, the Department of Ecology map of toxic cleanup sites in Redmond shows numerous sites where cleanup has only started or are awaiting cleanup, including the Redmond Flex site in southeast Redmond. The municipal code's special regulation on handling hazardous materials in Redmond raises concerns about potential harm to the public health and the environment from fumes and odors in the specified zones. Residents and businesses may lack the city's support when affected by emissions from businesses like auto body shops and dry cleaners. Does Redmond effectively enforce regulations to prevent harm from toxic fumes and odors caused by hazardous materials? My inquiry remains unanswered, and there are doubts and questions about the efficacy of compliance inspections and the city's commitment to reducing pollution. The Department of Ecology's map of toxic cleanup sites contradicts the assumption that all businesses are fully compliant. If Redmond receives complaints of fumes and unpleasant odors caused by a business which handles hazardous materials, perhaps the matter could be referred to Ecology's Pollution Prevention Assistance Program. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's everyone who's signed up. So we will move on to Redmond 2050 Economic Vitality Element Confirmation of Recommendation. And Glenn.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, I am Glenn Coyle, Senior Planner in the Long Range Planning Group. The purpose of this agenda item is for the Planning Commission to review and confirm its recommendation to the City Council to adopt the economic vitality element of the Redmond 2050 Comprehensive Plan to ensure it is consistent with the findings and preferred growth alternative as identified in the Redmond 2050 Final Environmental Impact Statement, or FEIS, which was published December 15th, 2023. The Planning Commission reviewed and recommended approval of updates to the economic vitality element during the second quarter of 2023 and voted to recommend approval at its June 28th, 2023 meeting. At the time, the Redmond 2050 environmental review was ongoing. While state law only requires that final action, that is, council adoption, occur after environmental review is complete, it has been the city's practice to complete environmental review prior to beginning Planning Commission's review. So this agenda item provides an opportunity for the Commission to either affirm its prior recommendation or modify its prior recommendation based on information contained in the supplemental EIS or the final EIS. And as noted in the memo, staff reviewed the documents and found no inconsistencies that could impact your recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. So seeing as there were no inconsistencies from the final EIS, do we have a motion to confirm our recommendation?
So moved. Second.
All in favor of confirming our recommendation?
Aye.
Aye. And our recommendation is confirmed.
Thank you.
Great. That was the easy one. Now we'll move on to Redmond 2050 Centers Element and Overlay Regulations, Study Session and Potential Recommendation. And Jeff is Becky tonight.
I am, and this chair is very low, so I'm going to sit up nice and tall. I'm also going to share the slides here momentarily. Okay. So to get to the beginning here. Here we go. All right, good evening, Planning Commissioners. Jeff Churchill, as the chair noted, and tonight we are here to seek a recommendation from the Planning Commission on the centers, portions of the centers element, and overlay regulations that have been presented to you over the course of the last 3 to 6 months. So we'll do just a refresh on kind of the centers element and what portions of it are proposed to be amended, the contents of the overlay regulations, just to remind you of the totality of the package, and then go over some specific revisions that occurred after the publication of the packet on Friday so we can all have the whole picture of what is on the table. The center's element was reviewed in 2022 and 2023 as part of Phase 1, and all of the contents of the center's element in Phase 2 is actually moving to the community development and design element. At the time that the Planning Commission was reviewing the center's element for just centers and Overlake, we were still intending, although this has changed, to adopt those changes and the Overlake regulations separately from the rest of the elements. That's no longer the case, but they still got reviewed early. So that's the only portion we're talking about now, although you see in your packet for tonight that you see how it fits into the larger community development and design as well. So it's the only portion we're asking for a recommendation on. The code pieces are several, and they were reviewed in 4 separate packages over the course of the last few months by the Planning Commission, and there were separate hearings for each one. They are a combination of updates specifically related to Overlake and the updates to the policies and the need to accommodate growth. And that's kind of on the left-hand column. Header in blue, Redmond 2050. There are also some related parts that are closely enough related that they kind of traveled along with the Overlake regulations that were originally scoped as part of the Redmond zoning code rewrite. So you're seeing a little bit of a combination there. So these are these chapters that are amended, that are part of the code rewrite. And we're going to go into each of them a little bit more. In 2104 is at the beginning of the zoning code, and it has some fairly general provisions. This specific amendment is about defining limited uses. And really a limited use is use that is permitted with some special regulations that apply. So it's permitted if you do X, beyond just kind of the standard zoning regulations that are generally applicable. So that's the purpose of a limited use. And that was further defined in 2104. 2122 public art would be a new chapter, and this codifies a process that the City Council approved for reviewing public art, and the Planning Commission reviewed this a few months ago. 2167 and Appendix 10 both have to do with green building. 2167 is the zoning code language for a green building, and Appendix 10 are the technical details for the green building incentive program. The idea is it had been quite some time since the green building program was put together, and it was certainly due for a refresh, especially in light of the fact that the city had adopted an environmental sustainability action plan in 2020. So really the goal is to align it with that. So it's a complete rewrite of the chapter. It takes account of a lot that's occurred since then, changes in energy codes, emphasis on low impact development among them. It is a voluntary program. And the Planning Commission has been reviewing that over the past several months as well. And some of the changes we're going to talk about tonight relate specifically to Appendix 10 here. 2145 would be a new chapter, and just as a reminder, this is to set standards for how to address solid waste management at multifamily and mixed-use sites, particularly in more urban contexts. In our centers, for example, where some of the spaces that might be more available and less constrained in a suburban setting are difficult to come by in an urban setting. So that's the purpose of creating this chapter. There are 2 specific changes in the definitions chapter. One is replacing the word marijuana with cannabis per state law, and then another is, again, addressing state law that expands accessible, affordable childcare and early childhood development programs, specifically waiving the limit restricting family daycare providers to 12 children, and creating a process for that. Okay, so the parking changes are going to get subsumed by the changes that are proposed in the transportation regulations. So you're going to approve this, and it's immediately going to get kind of overwritten by what you're going to review later this evening. All right, and then there are several chapters that are about Overlake specifically. TOD focus areas and intercultural districts is creating a chapter to house those. There are both existing in Overlake or proposed to exist. And we are also looking at TOD focus areas for downtown and for Miramar Village that we actually intend to bring you our first ideas on next month. Repealing high-capacity transit corridor preservation because it's no longer needed. Minor updates to the TDR chapter to reflect the new zoning districts. As we rename them, we have to find them everywhere in the code and rename them. So that's what that is about. The transition overlay areas, you may remember these are kind of special setbacks that exist at the boundaries of certain zones. This would, the revisions here would have that not apply where it would impede the implementation of the TOD focus area within the Metro Center in Overlake. So new naming in 2162, which are design standards for urban centers, high-rise tower standards being proposed for 2160. No standards for towers exist because there is no ability to build towers in Redmond, but there would be with the Overlake regulations, and so standards, design standards for those are included in 2160. 2162 has updated design standards for Miramar Village, some minor naming and cross-reference updates, and some updates related to various urban design standards, such as parking locations, parking garages, and things of that nature. This is all things you've already reviewed, and this is just a recapitulation of it all. And it was quite a large package, just going through this all. A number of definitions related to centers and transit-oriented development are in 2178, and the big one, just a complete overhaul of 2112, which is the Overlake chapter. This is a list of all the new sections in Overlake that are part of the package. I won't read them all, but this is, again, just a complete repeal and replace. 300 creates the zoning districts. 400 contains the land use regulations, so what uses would be allowed. This one also is kind of temporary because what we intend to propose to the Planning Commission is having a single, having all of the allowed uses be in 2104 at the beginning of the code for all of the zones. And so the information in this section would migrate to there. Setbacks, build two lines, how buildings relate to the street, that's what 500 is about. 600 is the incentive package on which you spent considerable time and effort. And there's another one, which is new, which is 505, the transition to new standards that was introduced for the January 10th public hearing. And with further apologies, the slides that I added to share with you the changes in the issues matrix disappeared between the time I turned off the computer and turned it back on. So I'm instead going to just bring up the issues matrix that has the same content, because I know not everyone had a chance to see that. So I do want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to look at it and consider it. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in here as far as I can and scroll back up. This is the issues matrix from December 20th. There are 11 issues on it. The first 6 were open, and they remained open because these were Commissioner Aparna's issues, and she was not present at the December 20th meeting, so that's kind of the background. And so we might as well go through it from top to bottom, and with many thanks to Jenny Liebeck, who is online. She and Aparna connected today about these, and so we just want to make sure we have resolution on them or a way forward before we have the Planning Commission make a recommendation.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jenny. So I would like to officially close the 1, 3, 5, and 6 right away. 4 can also be closed as long as we make sure that we come back to it and make sure that the calculator has more details when it is ready. And 2 is the one that, from what I understand, we need a lot more data on, and I'm hoping we can revisit it 2 is where I would like to see some information on mixed-use buildings with a heavy amount of multifamily in it. So what happens, can we have a combination of Appendix M for the multifamily and a different kind of plumbing sizing for the retail/commercial component of these mixed-use buildings? I know it's a little bit more complicated and involved question, but that building type is very hard to pin down. So can we have an answer for it in the next round and then close this, please? That will be for 2. And 4 also, at a later date, I'd like to see information on the calculator, specifics for the calculator.
Great. So for issue 2, is it also related to issue 1? Because that's where the Appendix M comes up specifically. So I want to make sure we.
Okay, yeah, we could just swap it out, maybe, yeah.
Okay. But I understand what you're asking for, which is to take a look at how we can apply a concept like Appendix M in a mixed-use building, or what to do about that. And so yes, we can investigate that with the subject matter experts, and we have the kind of the omnibus public hearing coming up this summer where we'll tie up some loose ends and kind of bring the whole plan back for the Planning Commission to look at, and that would be a timeline on which we could address that.
That would be fine. So if we can just make sure, that's, I believe it is 1, so my mistake on that one. The second one is something on the commercial building side. I believe that also needs some kind of, how do I put it, more elaboration. But that also can be brought back together. Both building types can be brought back together at the omnibus public hearing. It sounds very scary, though. But yeah, so we can put those 2 as a bundle for the next round, and the calculator points as well for the next round. So that's 3 closed but open items. And if you could make a note in our recommendation packet that these will be revisited, I'd be really appreciative. I don't want to drop the ball.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Weston.
I'm just a little confused about the concept of closed but open.
It's closed, but we'll make a note that.
So we'll make a note in the recommendation, but also and I think in the recommendation we can say, and the plan is to conduct some further research and evaluation in the winter and spring and bring that back to you this summer with kind of the final hearing and study sessions on the plan. So
Does it make sense to leave them open then?
Well, we have to close the issues matrix. It's not going to be part of this recommendation.
I see.
So, right,
Okay.
it'll be in a future.
It's our recommendation to kick the can down the road, okay?
Taking this part out of this
Yeah.
part and,
To the next part.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure they don't get lost because I think they're good
It's been
points.
done in other places as well. We've
Okay.
done it
It's been
before.
done before.
Great.
It's, yeah, it doesn't get lost. It just,
Okay.
but we have to close out this issues matrix for the recommendation. And we're not going to resolve this part of it in this recommendation.
May I actually jump in with my question? Because I think it's going to be relevant here. So I think I've lost the broader picture of what is happening here. The Venn diagram of Overlake and then, which I was following, and centers, and then the new community development and design element. Like, what are we actually doing today in the recommendation?
Overlake. And there's, later, we'll be talking about community development. And at some point, it's all going to get kind of merged in.
It seemed like a
parts of
lot of overlap to me when I was reading, so I'm confused where the line is, and maybe there's a calendar piece that I'm missing?
A what piece? I'm sorry.
Like a calendar piece?
Calendar piece. So we are asking for a recommendation on overlake policies and overall centers policies, and we printed those separately in your packet so you can see which ones those are and exactly what's changed between the last time you saw them and tonight. We're asking you for a recommendation on those because we're also asking for a recommendation on the overlay regulations, and we want to bring those to the council together because you reviewed them together and because the council needs to see the policy foundation for the regulatory updates that you're recommending. So that's why we want those recommendations to travel together as one. At the same time, we've already begun the process of moving those policies into the new community development design element and putting them together with downtown and with Mary Moore and with others. And at the end of the day, that all gets adopted at the same night in the same ordinance. And so the sequencing will kind of cease to matter at that point. But because the overlay regulations are ready and the overlay policies are ready and the center's policies are ready because they got reviewed first, we want to move those to council together so that they can see it as one thing, and we will then move the rest of the community development and design element later in the spring, and the council will review it in the summer.
Okay.
But they'll adopt it all
So
at the
this
same
is
time.
largely because it's so big. We reviewed it together. We want to keep the policies and code in sync.
Yeah, and it was just sort of we're sort of doing this, changing this thing as we go along and rearranging it as we go along and figuring out how it all's going to fit together as we go along, and things shift.
And when does this recommendation, if we make it tonight, go to city council?
February 6th.
Okay. Versus 4 months from now for the entire. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I want to make sure we cover the specific code changes that are proposed as a result of the conversations since the last time we talked about this. One of them is in issue 2, and this is this is part of the appendix, if I'm not mistaken, that there is a bullet to be added here about water leak detection to install water sensors connected to a local building management system or metering solution on water use subsystems. This is one optional technique of more than one to be added in Appendix 10 to address, Commissioner Aparna, specifically, your comment.
That was the idea, that it gets added, and we just have to make sure it's added, that's all, so.
I'll keep going unless there's more discussion on that. Okay. In issue 3, this is about embodied carbon, and the proposed changes are here. Do you want to speak to it?
No,
Aparna?
I think it works great. As per my request, we just wanted to zoom in on what the barriers, minimum barriers are for this, because it's a very complicated space and the calculations add burden to the developers. So having the highest impact materials with embodied carbon would be it's the lowest hanging fruit for now. And so this is based on science and research. These materials are the ones which have the highest embodied carbon. But they also have the most data available. Therefore, this is the best way to go forward. People can go further, as noted, but this is the minimum on those. So, thank you.
Commissioner Weston.
Sorry, I'm trying to read this. I didn't get a chance to read ahead of time. What is the difference between 11 and 12, other than the 10 and 30%?
I can speak to that. So what we did is, in response to Commissioner Aparna's recommendation, is instead of just noting that we would calculate that they should calculate the embodied carbon baseline, we narrowed it to specific materials, so concrete, steel, and insulation. So that's the new language here. And that was applied to both 11 and 12, the two techniques that referenced embodied carbon.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and the final change here is on issue 11, which is a new issue, and this was the one that was raised at the January 10th hearing about how projects will transition to the new regulations. as one of the concerns, and then a second concern about what kind of exceptions would be granted to the rule that buildings need to be mixed-use buildings. So starting with that one first, there is a table in 2112, and there's a note in the table that describes what those acceptable exceptions would be. And the change here is, instead of listing parcel size and or slope, it's a broader list, including but not limited to parcel size and or slope, so that other conditions could be considered as well. That would be limiting to the point where a mixed-use building wouldn't be feasible. So it's to increase some flexibility there. And then in 2112-505, which is a new section for which the hearing was held on January 10th, this is about, if you've got a project in the pipeline, what are the provisions available that would let you get to the end of the road before so that you wouldn't need to kind of start over and redesign the project. So the changes here are, we heard about difficulty in getting scheduled on the design review board. So instead of actually having feedback from the design review board, there would also be an option of just hearing from staff that a meeting was ready to be scheduled would be sufficient. And then this applies to most land use application types. But type 5 permits, what we're really talking about there is development agreements. And development agreements don't end in building permits, they end in the agreement that the city council approves. And so the December 31st, 2026 deadline wouldn't apply to type 5. It only applied to type 2, 3, and 4, because those are the only ones that end kind of in building permits. Also, the deadline has been extended out a year. So this provides a minimum of 2 years, but it's really 2+, because it's whoever's in the pipeline today, to get from their entitlement review to their building permit application, so complete application. So it's not actually getting the certificate of occupancy or starting construction, it's just having your complete building permit application in hand by December 31st, 2026, which we think is a reasonable compromise, because 2 years should be enough time to get there. And as a consequence, the section would not expire until December 31st, 2026. So that date has also been changed.
Commissioner Wesson.
If I can go back to the first one, who gets to decide if the site conditions preclude multifamily? Or mixed use?
It's going to be the code administrator has the authority to make permit decisions for, these are generally site plan entitlements. So it's going to be the code administrator who is the planning director.
Okay. Is that predictable enough that it doesn't just turn into either like a lobbying point or would people be able to tell if their project clearly qualified or didn't?
What normally happens, just as a matter of practice, is that people will come in with pre-application meetings, and this will be one of the questions they ask. We think this site qualifies for an exception. What is the planning department's opinion on that? So, and I expect that would be the first place it gets aired.
I guess what I'm wondering is if this is actually rigorous enough that it would make it possible to continue to think that mixed use would be the standard, or if it makes it much easier to kind of toss this aside.
I don't think that the change in the language has an impact on that.
Okay.
It's hard to know what every circumstance is going to be, and we can't write that in the code. And so we use words like substantially limit. So that's an amount that is not precise, but we know it's more than a little bit, and it's substantial.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess there are two ways I'm hoping that I want to avoid, and they're both kind of coming out to pushing for something a little bit more declarative. The first is developer confusion, because I do think that knowing upfront what the rules are makes it a lot easier to stick to those rules and like not get bogged down in an impossible situation. And then from the city perspective, being able to develop the area to a type of development that the city is looking for. And so in both cases, I think it's better to be a little bit more prescriptive.
But that requires being a little more crystal ball gazing. I mean, the reason for adding the included but not limited to is because the argument was that there could be other factors besides parcel size and or slope. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think it's always going to be somewhat of a negotiation.
And there is a safe harbor, which is to follow the rule to do a mixed-use building. So that is the predictable standard. If you do that, it will get approved because that's what the standard is. If you don't want to do that, then there's a burden of showing why not and finding one of these conditions.
The predictable way is to do what the city wants, which is mixed use. If you want something else, then you've got to.
I might be coming at this as like a mom of a 14-year-old, but this just seemed like a very wiggle room sort of area. I'm fine with it, but
Well, I think, the no wiggle room, if you want total predictability, then do mixed use. If you think you need some wiggle room, then we've got some wiggle room for you.
Oh, different wiggle room. Like, basically what I'm saying is like being able for someone to read the code and be like, does my site apply or not to this exception?
That's why we have pre-application process.
Okay.
You come in and say, I'd like to not do that. Can I get by with that? I don't want to follow the normal path.
If the city's fine with that, I am, but I was curious, like it seems like it's inviting that process to include that argument.
Clarity is a great thing, and is often at odds with providing flexibility. And the request was, the concern was that it was too limiting, and that there could be other circumstances. And I think the consequence of creating more flexibility is a loss of clarity, because it creates more potential exceptions. But those are often in tension, and you find that throughout the code. Mm-hmm. And so this would be, I think, one of many examples you would find.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, one of the things we heard from developers was that it can be difficult to do mixed use on certain streets because they don't get the kind of traffic and walking traffic and that would support it. So I think that's
another exception request might be, right now Redmond is, according to some of the work that's coming out of the Economic Development Strategic Plan, Redmond has very low retail vacancy rates. But you can imagine where maybe that situation is reversed, and at some point in time, retail vacancies rates are very high. Redmond's over-retailed, and someone might come in and say, look, the site condition here is we're not in a situation where anybody can build retail. And that's something that's not listed here, but that could be considered. I don't know if it can qualify as a site condition per se, except that it's kind of occurs in a time and place, but.
I think it's to everyone's benefit to have some flexibility, to have the predictable path, but to have some flexibility around that path.
As long as it doesn't, there's a cost associated with that. So as long as the cost is written in as an expected part of that policy, then I'm fine with that.
Okay. Are you suggesting changes to the language, or?
What I'm concerned about is that it's going to be, like, everything will be a site condition that precludes building retail, like that people would prefer not to build it. And so it's easy to claim site condition, when really what they mean is economic condition. Or business plan, or,
So the language prior to this, it said such as. So it said such as parcel size and or slope. So the real nuance here is that this is like adding not limited to. So the alternative, leave it as such as parcel size and or slope, which also implies that there are other things.
The city can also say no. You can't.
right?
Yeah. Just because somebody asks for something doesn't mean they get it.
There's just a cost to the asking.
Yeah. But it's a cost on both sides to the asking.
Okay, so I believe that carries us through a review of the package and identification of things that are new since you last saw it, which are the 3 things that are in the issues matrix. This issue is open, so before the commission moved on, we need to close this issue.
We ready to close this issue? Yes, we're ready to close this issue. Does anybody have any discussion or further questions about the center's element and overlay regulations? Do we have a motion for a recommendation?
Yes, so moved.
Second.
Before you vote, can I just clarify for the record if the motion is to recommend what was in your packet today for tonight, which is the center's element amendments and the zoning code package as kind of revised through the issues matrix that we just discussed, just so that it's clear for the record. Is that what?
No, that is
What
absolutely
I understand it to be? Okay.
I appreciate
Yeah.
No, you don't.
the emphasis on clarity. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, now that we all know what we're voting on. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? And recommendation passes.
Thank you, and on behalf of Becky, thank you, and on behalf of Jenny, also thank you.
Okay. Now we will move on to the housing element regulations for Redmond 2050. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Now I'd like to welcome up Mike Stanger, expert witness from ARCH, a regional coalition for housing, and I will share my PowerPoint. Okay, so we are talking about housing, both the element of the comprehensive plan, the technical appendix of the comprehensive plan, and the regulations. So we'll go through what we're asking to PC tonight. We'll do a summary of the housing element, summary of the amendments. Much like the overlay presentation that just came before you, there were further revisions to the draft amendments between when the 24th packet was published and now, so we'll go over that. I have an example recommendation and then our timeline. The ask is, what is the Planning Commission recommendation for those 3 items? The housing element, the technical appendix, and the amendments. As a reminder, the housing element was one of the first elements that was going through the Redmond 2050 process. The Commission reviewed the 3 versions of the housing element. July and August went through the full technical committee report. We have a land code. We are under the broader Redmond 2050 SEPA. Ultimately, the commission completed a review but deferred a formal vote until the whole piece was there. But there were no remaining issues open on that issues matrix, and there seemed to be consensus on decision. For the amendment summary, here's what was in January 10th content. We've seen this. What's most relevant is what changed between the 10th and the 24th packet. Largely changes to 2120. We added that alternative compliance development agreement option. We'll touch on that. The improved clarity for the Pioneer provision table. We added a 70% AMI band for the Pioneer provision table to give a little bit more granularity. And we also increased the total number of units. And we added development partners as potential entities responsible for the payment of fees for the affordable housing developed on religious lands. And then for live work, we also added a provision about including a proportional mix across both the market rate and the affordable housing. We have a provision to that intent in 2120, but because live work units are a little bit different than bedrooms, we just wanted to make that explicit. Here's the change to the Pioneer provision. Overall, it's an increase of 50 market rate units, and we've added that middle tranche of 12.5 units at 70% AMI. There's the addition of the provision for development partners could be responsible for the fees. For live work units, that's very much the same language that's in 2120, just tweaked for this specific typology. And here's the recommendation for the mandatory inclusionary zoning specifically for Overlake. And as always, please note that the MFTE will be amended to align with the new IZ regulations, but that is outside the purview of the Planning Commission. And then here is the changes of the changes. These are the revisions that occurred after the 24th packet was published. And as you can see, they're mainly in 2120. So let's walk through them. This is the third alternative compliance piece. Our input here was that we wanted to provide more flexibility for satisfying on-site affordable housing units. So the intent of these revisions are, let's say a proposal comes in and for whatever reason, the exact set aside and AMI level doesn't work for the project, but say more affordable units at a higher AMI can provide a total public benefit that makes the project launch. The administrator would have the discretion to review that and accept that proposal. The initial language that was in your packet had proposals approved through a development agreement. And as we just saw in the previous presentation, that's largely a type 5 and it can be quite a challenge. By amending that to a condition of the entitlement process, we hope that will help our development stakeholders feel that they can more deftly adapt to the conditions and move through the development process. So I'll pause here. Any questions on this one?
Commissioner Weston.
Just definition, who is the administrator in this case?
The Director of Planning.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Parna.
I just wanted to know, when you say that the entitlement process is sort of easier to navigate, what are we talking in terms of time, complexity, money, or all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay.
Instead of going through a process, it pretty much is a collaboration with city staff on ensuring that the required conditions of getting their project going is memorialized in that document. So it's very straight A to B.
Okay. And so hypothetically, does that cut down the process timeline by what, few months, maybe longer? I mean, just just to get a sense of how much they're saving.
A development agreement is going to be several months. So it's probably several months of time savings. And it's also, there's still a negotiation of what exactly the condition of the entitlement would look like. So that has to occur.
Okay.
But there's not a council process attached to it. There's not a hearing process attached to it. It just lives with the entitlement, which is approved administratively as a code compliance.
So you're essentially saying that it's just a negotiation process without all without all the additional approval levels, just like one, like bidirectional with the city planning team?
The difference between who approves of the entitlement is the code administrator, who is the planning director.
Okay.
Who approves the entitlement is the technical committee, which is the planning director and the public works director. Who approves a development agreement is the city council.
Okay. So we-
I mean, there'll still be some projects that will go through a development agreement, you know.
Okay. This is largely just cleaning up. What we're doing here is removing the 2120 general provision that says affordable units get a bonus density or bonus market rate units. This will go into the overlay section, the pieces that we've been touching on specifically, and saying the density bonus and bonus market rate unit provisions won't apply to developments in overlay. As a reminder, this was already factored into the analysis. So all the math we saw takes this into consideration. And one of the reasons we're pursuing this is because the development capacity increase of the zoning districts as part of the Redmond 2050 process is in fact representing that kind of otherwise bonus. So it's just cleaning that up. Any questions? No. Okay. And this last one is also largely a cleanup. We just need to basically Control F and replace the term religious property throughout with our faith-based definition that is in 2178. I will note it'll need to be a little bit more nuanced for F.5 because the point is to reference the Revised Code of Washington, which is using the term religious property. So that will take a little bit more nuance, but the intent is the same. We're basically just getting consistency. Perfect. And here's our timeline. Look at all those public hearings.
Look at all those checked offs.
And we recognize that there's a lot here, so we wanted to provide explicit language to help make sure everything is captured. But as always, let's have a discussion. What are our thoughts at this point?
Okay. Commissioner Van Nymen.
So when we're talking about the recommendation, it's the whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
So.
Ooh, and I'm sorry, real quick, I want to emphasize that while the commission makes a recommendation as a whole, every commissioner, of course, has the opportunity to attach as an exhibit to the report that goes to council their own independent opinion.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, we don't, you know, we vote, we don't operate on consensus. Consensus is not even always desirable. We explore the problem space, so we don't have to agree. We just have to come up with
just to clarify then, any minority opinion would, if I object to any one thing, I have to vote against the whole packet, is just what we're saying.
Well, you can make a proposal, if you like, to amend it and see if you can get votes for that.
Another option is if you wanted to, the commission could take separate votes on the plan and the regulations. I wouldn't suggest splitting it into like a lot of votes because it'll get confusing, but if you wanted to, if you love the policies but not the regulations, you could have,
If there's,
you'd have two votes.
You know, if there's something that you object to that you want to change, you could try to see if you could get 4 votes for it.
I'm pretty clear on where people are at. And
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And I just don't want to withhold my approval for the entire packet when it's one thing in particular that I object to. So I would prefer to vote separately on the zoning changes. Just,
Okay, we can do that.
I mean, I'm curious to know what the thoughts are, and because maybe I'm in agreement with you, or maybe I'm not. I mean, I'd be curious to know.
well, I've stated my concern the whole time, that I think that that we're making it too difficult for developers to build, and we're risking not ending up with any housing at all. That this is not a solution specifically for affordable housing. This is a solution for, or that the zoning change applies to everything. That if you've overshot, there is a point. We don't know mathematically where the point is. There is a point where mathematically you've pushed the developers too far. You're effectively taxing the developers. I mean, effectively. And if you've overshot it, they don't build because it's too expensive. They don't build anything. They don't just not build your affordable housing that you wanted. They don't build anything. And then supply is constrained and prices go up, which is the exact opposite of the intention of the program. I don't claim to know exactly where that number is. I'm just not entirely persuaded that we've found the right. There's a number somewhere. I mean, I think we can all agree there's a number somewhere that says you've made it too hard for them to build. I just think direct subsidies are probably a more effective way to not try to manipulate the developers into that you're not manipulating the free market the same way, that you're allowing developers to build. So that's my concern, and I think I've made that clear. And I kind of understand where the rest of you are at, and I get it.
I think direct subsidies, I think any way you go, you're manipulating the market. There's no such thing as a completely free market. Direct subsidies also manipulate the market, just at a different end.
I'm just saying that direct subsidies affect only the part of the market that you're actually trying to impact, which is affordable housing, whereas
No,
this potentially impacts
that's not true.
the entire kit and caboodle.
No, direct
If you-
subsidies impact the entire
demand
market
side.
because they impact the demand side, which will also drive up rents. If you add more money faster than you add more supply, it will drive up rents.
So the goal is to try to add as much supply as you possibly can. And this,
Right. But the supply market, the market won't solve the affordable housing. Yes.
I think I understand where you're coming from, but here is where I differ. I believe that while the free market does its own thing, we are here to provide recommendations for regulations which help the community. That's the eye on the ball. Our eye on the, so if we are redefining some aspects of the market, I believe very strongly that the market will readjust and figure out a different format to do this. The same formula cannot be held. Business will reinvent itself. It will find its level. If we had a specific level where we said, okay, you know what, everybody meets at this point, it's one thing. But when we don't have that level, we have to figure out and put the needs of the people first, because they have definitely come up and said, we can't stay here, we can't afford it. So I believe that it is our place to talk about how free market cannot be that free because it comes at the expense of the people in the community.
Commissioner Weston.
Yeah, the thing that, I really agree with what you're saying with the level, like that there is a level somewhere and we don't know where it is. The things that I'm watching in this decision, I'm not necessarily trying to convince you because I think you've been really consistent in your view and I understand that. The things that really speak to me in this are, first of all, just understanding where the need is, like market rate housing. the way the market is set right now is not the need. There's a huge gulf there, and trying to kind of nudge some of that back into where the need is instead of where the profit is. I think it's like a difficult choice, but I think it's the right choice. And then the other piece, there was an argument last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago at our last meeting, just about how much the value of the land and the value of the property rises as it's improved. And the argument that the public, like Redmond, the people who live here should be able to share in some of that, was, to me, that was a very strong argument. We're not trying to cripple business or cut off resources or deny growth. It's really saying like there is a rising tide here and trying to seize it to make that moment work where we can actually fill a huge need in our community at the same time that we're building.
Commissioner Van Nyman.
Can you maybe clarify then for me, when we talk about the cost of the land, and I certainly understand the idea that the community gets to take advantage of the appreciation in the land, but the landowner is the one that gets the increased price for their land, and then we're effectively, pardon the shorthand, taxing the developer, right? That the landowner gets to walk with 3 times the value because we've inherently allowed for their land to be worth more. The landowner still now is going to charge the developer more, so the developer has paid more for the land, which it wasn't clear that was reflected in the analysis. And the person that ends up getting taxed, and when we talk about sharing the burden with the community, sharing the value with the community, is the developer and not the landowner.
So, Mike Stanger, Senior Planner at Arch. And the way it typically works is that the landowner, if the landowner is selling to a developer, let's say, the landowner will not get the full value of the increased development capacity because the value of the development is reduced in part by the affordability of the housing. So a smart developer will account for the cost of the affordable housing or the reduced income from those units, and not so. Let's say the capacity is going from 100 to 200 units, and now 12.5% of those units are going to be affordable. So they're taking into account the cost of that. They're not paying for market rate of 200 units. They're paying for market rate of 187 units or whatever, and 12.5 affordable units. Or I guess I should have doubled that, but.
No, I understand what you're saying, that without the city stepping in and making this change, the new value of the land is twice what it used to be worth, 3 times what it used to be worth. And now, because the city is effectively clawing back some of that, the new value of the land is 2.8 times what it would have otherwise been worth, because the city clawed it back.
Yeah. Also note that whether you do inclusionary zoning or direct subsidy, the money has to come from somewhere. Somebody's paying for it somewhere.
Right. Well,
right? It's not.
In a perfect world, there might be better ways of taxing and distributing.
Yes, but in the world we live in,
has so many tools.
In the world we live in, the money, if we said, okay, we're going to throw this out and do direct subsidy, we would need a revenue source for that direct subsidy.
Well, and again, in a perfect world, maybe that.
Well, but I'm not in a perfect world.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you wanted that model, you have to come up with the revenue stream. But on the other hand, you're allowing for more robust supply to be created.
Not necessarily, because where am I going to get that money? Am I going to tax? Yeah, I mean, the way developers are saying is we'll do fee in lieu. But if I do fee in lieu at a rate that I would need to be comparable to inclusionary zoning, then it's costing them the same. I mean, the money it takes to do this is the money it takes to do this. Right? I mean, Commissioner Wesson.
And actually, the issue with that to me isn't, the cost might be the same, but the amount of actual affordable housing that results is much lower because fee in lieu takes a while to accumulate, and then you don't have the land and you're waiting for a
But,
project.
even if I could get it immediately, if I'm going to give direct subsidy to the same number of people that inclusionary zoning would provide housing to, it's going to cost more. If they're not built, I don't see how it's going to be cheaper
Right.
to provide housing to that same number of people.
There's an opportunity cost in when a project is in front of you versus a
Yeah.
hypothetical project.
And so if I'm getting the money from developers either way, I don't really see, I mean, they want it because they think they'll get cheaper, and I'm going, but then I won't get the housing I want. So somebody's got to pay for it. I don't get to just pull money out of the sky.
I mean, I think you said it well, and at the end of the day, it comes down to profit versus need versus profit. We're making a decision. Are we making a decision based on the needs of the community or elements of the community, or are we making decisions based on dollars and cents and, frankly, profit? It really boils down to those two decisions, those two options.
I'd also like to add that all the economic arguments have been in the near term. I am not saying that the numbers will pencil in 20 years from now. I don't know what it's going to be like, but nobody's discussed the economic repercussions of either not building this, not going with this option, or going with this option in the long term. So in the long run, we know what the social costs are going to be if we don't have, but we don't know what that looks like if we kick the can down the road. This is an opportunity in Overlake because, and one of the King County housing people or somebody alluded to this, and I thought it was a very fair point, is we are doing a significant upzone. We are not going to see that again for a very long time. We're not going to have skyscrapers every place in the city. So skyscrapers or, high buildings in whatever way, right? So this is that point in time. You either do it now or we hold our peace on this tool because it is now that we are increasing the density. So there's actual opportunities for the developers to get creative with their options to develop different types of buildings and maximize their returns in other ways, which weren't possible before and unlikely to be again in any other place because, So for me, that's the opportunity here. That's Overlake right now. Light rail, everything will get built up significantly now. So I hear you and I understand that, but if there was a tangible alternative, right, we could have a discussion. But for me, right now, I don't see, the cost of inaction is too high. That's how I'm weighing it right now.
I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong answer.
Right.
They're both good answers. I think it comes down to the choice. Are we looking to meet some of the need of the community? It's not all, but some of the need of the community, or are we looking at the profit needs of developers? It's a choice we're making.
At the end of the day, we have a $3 trillion company.
And I respect your
If
opinion.
there's no profit, there is no housing.
I understand, but I don't think this is eliminating the profit. At the end of the day, we have a $3 trillion company that employs 50,000 people in Redmond.
I'm just saying that the choice is not between need and profit, because if without profit, there is no housing being built at all.
And I would say that if there's an opportunity to build housing, there will be a developer that builds it, whether it's these sets of developers or alternate developers. And so it still comes down to a decision that we're making. Are we making a decision for the needs of some of the people in this community, or are we making the needs for the investment needs of developers? There's not a right answer, there's not a wrong answer. It's a choice that we're making, and it's an individual choice that we're making.
I think we've pursued this as,
Before we vote, can we just very briefly discuss the Pioneer provision?
Sure.
The Pioneer provision, because there have been a lot of changes since we last saw this
Okay,
2 weeks ago, and I just want to
there it is.
give it air.
Okay.
So we're not including parking, which is something that was as an additional sweetener, which was something that was potentially floated in a very brief comment at the end of last time.
There was a lot of discussion about parking. I think the high-level reminder is that parking requirement minimums are generally going away. And so there's not really a pioneer provision to go into because we're making it less, not more.
Okay, I'm totally comfortable with that. I just wanted to check. And then the step down is the other piece.
So where did these numbers come from? Because when we talked about increasing them, I was kind of surprised to see that the total increase was 50. That didn't seem like a lot to me.
Well, the increase is 50 plus the split of no longer going directly down to 60 AMI.
Oh, the dollars associated with the, right, okay, right. So it's 50 units plus the affordability based on the other AMIs.
Yeah.
Right, okay. And just to clarify, this is, a unit is a regular unit, not the total size of the project, not an affordable unit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the math that when you talked about, I did the math on 30 years of building 8,000 units, right?
Yeah, there's going to be...
So it's like 300 and some per year if you just did it linearly. So this would be a year and a half effectively worth of something like that. I mean, I know they come in, it's not linear, but.
Yeah, and one of the considerations of this is that it does kind of provide that little incentive to get going a little bit sooner than otherwise would.
Commissioner Wesson?
Is this addressed, so the idea of comps as being a driver of the Pioneer project was raised a few times. Are comps playing into this, or is it really just trying to get the ball rolling, trying to get 1 or 2 or 3 new projects like in the hopper?
I didn't hear the question.
So the original, some of the like December era conversations on the Pioneer project were about creating comps so that other projects could get their financing later. Is that still a consideration for these, or is it really just about the calendar and trying to get things moving along?
I don't know if it's a primary driver, but it certainly does add that kind of proof in the pudding.
Right. Once your first ones get built, then that does create comps.
Okay. But we'd gone around talking a little bit about that originally, and that's not really a reason to think about the Pioneer project. Like, this isn't a trial in the same way that those original conversations were. This is much more just trying to get people in the door.
I would say so, because our current 8-year MFTE program already requires 60% AMI units in Overlake, so we know that it does work. So this is not, an untested experiment.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Would someone, you want to bring up the motion again? Would someone like to make a motion?
Right, I will read all the text. I would like to move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of amendments to the housing element and housing element technical appendix of the comprehensive plan for now, and then a second vote on the Redmond zoning code later.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so that part's approved. And we have a motion on the zoning code.
And I also move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of amendments to the Redmond zoning code for the associated housing regulations as provided in the Commission's January 24th, 2024 published packet materials, and as amended according to the content shown in the updated slides of tonight.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Okay. And that passes 4-1. And if you want to add a dissent to the packet, when do you need it?
I think we said, we were talking about Monday, so that anybody would have the weekend to be able to do that. That means it wouldn't be in your packet on Friday, but we could send it out by email before the meeting. But it would be in time to get it to the city council by February 6th. Would that work for people who have intentions of writing? Okay, Monday be okay?
Did you also say earlier, if I understood you correctly, that even if you did vote yes, you can also add?
Yes, you can.
Everyone is invited.
Yes.
So
Even if you voted yes, you can.
if you are so inspired between now and Monday, please send it our way. Okay.
Yeah, just get it by Monday. Yeah. I have submitted an opinion even on something I voted yes on before, so.
Is that like Monday, 5 o'clock or Monday midnight?
Yeah. I'll let you figure that out. Okay. Thank you, Ian. How about if we take a 5-minute break before we move on? So it's 8:24. We'll make it 6. We'll come back at 8:30.
Yay, thank you.
We'll next take up Redmond 2050 Transportation Element and Related Regulations Final Draft Study Session. Jeff.
All right, good evening. Josh Mueller, Jeff Churchill here to walk through the transportation element and appendices and regulations. We presented the content.
That was interesting.
We fixed it.
Chris? Oh, okay.
Fixed it.
Okay. All right.
2 weeks ago, we presented the whole package with the presentation and said that tonight we would focus on the issues matrix that had been generated over the last couple of years, actually, and because many of these have updates based on the final draft. And this is in preparation for a hearing that's scheduled for next Wednesday, the 31st, for all of this. So if it's all right with you, I thought we'd go through the open issues and talk about what has changed. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. Issue 1 is about strategies for achieving target 0, and the language around that has changed. And so I'd love to hear what commissioners think about that. And it's bolded here on the screen.
Yes.
Just a note for Chris that the view on the screen is of us, not of the document. Is that a problem?
What?
Oh, just usually we have a view of the document. Here? It might be my meeting.
I'm seeing the document.
Okay, got it. Never mind.
Yeah, I'm seeing the document. Okay.
So the main discussion point previously was whether or not to include a target year.
Right.
And so this has been revised to, it doesn't say there's a year, it doesn't say there's a not a year. It basically says do a Vision Zero action plan and base your actions on that and your outcomes based on that. So that's the kind of change in approach.
Yeah. I was the person who was unhappy with the target year because I didn't think it was realistic given where we were and what we were doing. So I'm happier with this. I don't like aspirational policies. I like policies that are realistic and achievable.
Okay, so is it okay to close this issue then?
Yes.
All right. Issue 2 is about the wording in equity and mobility, and raised by Commissioner East when Commissioner East was on the commission. And so there haven't been a lot of changes to this section or the approach. What has changed is that we're working with Jan Harrison, who's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Advisor for the city, for her to develop a consistent approach that we can apply throughout the comprehensive plan. So she's doing that now. So we haven't changed this yet, but I would anticipate refinements based on recommendations from Jan that you would see in the summer, again, with like the loose ends. Like that would be one of the loose ends. So I don't know that we could close it now, but that's kind of the path that we're on.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can go ahead and close this because the whole thing will be addressed. I'll speak for Judy since she's in Texas.
Okay, several of these have been closed. We're going to scroll forward to the open ones. Okay, issue 14. And Commissioner Aparna had emailed earlier saying a number of these could be closed, and I believe one of them was issue 14. And I think it's actually several in a row. But do we want to say what they were about? This one was about infrastructure resilience. 15 was another one. No, that wasn't, that one was Commissioner Weston, actually, so let's stop there. And this was about reflecting different parts of the population in the policy, specifically trips taken by and generated by children. And so we've done two things. We've updated the narrative to include a specific example that uses children in like a trip that they take. And then policy 6.7, and all these will be renumbered. They won't have decimals at the end, but just for the sake of keeping the numbers consistent from draft to draft, they haven't changed. It doesn't mention like children specifically, but it does talk about the independent mobility of those who cannot or choose not to drive, and that does include children.
So I'm torn on this. The intent of the comment was just that the transportation is a problem for people with children specifically, in a way that is possibly different from someone that chooses not to drive or can't drive. Children generate a lot of trips, generally to the same places, generally at times when other people with children are traveling there. And it just, I don't feel like that quite emerged in this revision of it. I'm willing to table, I was very new on the commission when I made this comment, but I still think the point holds that one of the scariest traffic situations that I encounter as a Redmond resident is outside the middle school, and the second scariest is outside the high school, and I don't go to the elementary schools because the driving is very, very difficult there. So I still feel like there is a real point here where it's like the place I most worry about pedestrian safety, the place I most worry about bike safety, the e-bike safety is really daunting at the secondary schools. I feel like there is a real question right now about how do we achieve any of these goals if we don't like take a harder look at what's happening with kids. Like they have to get somewhere after school to childcare. They have to get like the sports practice zoo outside some of the parks. It's just like there's a real tension point here where I love the policies as written, but when I go through them in terms of the families I know with kids, they are not achievable.
You should try driving on 104th.
Right? Everyone has their tails. Like it's really, like you should try making a left turn wherever. Like you should completely avoid this rotary.
Redmond High and Mann and Hartman Park and the middle school.
And the pool.
That whole neighborhood is just a danger zone.
Right.
It's not just people, it's property too.
Right. So I don't know. I'm really torn on this because I want to be able to close it, but I think that there's a real like nugget of a problem here that is intractable, and it's going to make it hard to achieve the rest of the goals.
I wonder if you think that are the problem and kind of the future we want, are those clearly identified in the element? Because I think we need that. The how we solve it, I think, belongs in the transportation master plan and in other places that are kind of the how and the strategies and the actions. But I think if we can identify the problem and the future we want here, I think that's what we really need to do. And so I'm interested in your perspective tonight or another time on like if we're there yet or if we need more here.
I think it needs to be stronger. So that's why I'm saying like I'm reluctant to close it because I really appreciate the redirection to the transportation master plan because I think you're exactly right. That's the place where most of this belongs. But I think there is a real issue around.
I think what I'm hearing you saying is you don't think that the problem is well articulated in the document.
I could read this document and not realize that like transportation to and from schools is an issue. Like I could be like, yes, children also travel in cars, but it's not a like, this is like the most difficult. There's like one business parking lot that I know of and then the schools, and it is, those are always dicey situations.
Trader Joe's and
I wasn't going to mention it by name, but yes.
Trader Joe's is nationally known to be a problem.
Notoriously.
Notoriously.
Yes. But so I don't know. I really still think that there's an issue here that needs a little bit more
Okay.
wrapper.
All right. Thank you. Good discussion. 16 was from Commissioner Glibhoff, and we have more information now than we did then. So there's Appendix H, which has the different types of bicycle facilities and where they would be located, identified on a map, including the protected bicycle facilities. And he's not here to provide his opinion on that.
I'll close it for him. Go ahead.
Oh, I appreciated him championing this. 3 of my family, I'm the only family member who doesn't do almost all of their commuting by bicycle. So this is a hot topic in my household. I've been keeping an eye on it, and I really appreciate all the work that went into it.
Commissioner Parna.
On a very light note, this feels like sedimentary rock. You know, we're seeing all the different commissioners, ghosts of Christmas past. So, yeah.
Keep waiting for Roy to show up in here.
Okay, issue 17 is about communication and education about the transportation system. It came up in the context of parking. We did revise that policy to address education and communication.
I don't even remember what that meant.
Has been a while.
So that was a discussion about bike safety mostly at the time, just that people, like if people were more aware of their options for biking, especially around the school question, like getting to the middle schools, and there were like more people actually doing it, then it would be safer. So it was very tied into that
It's a
child
general
piece.
comment that I often make about community outreach and trying to persuade people to understand how safe they can be. If you don't help them understand the safety features that have been built into the system, they might assume that it's not safe for their child to ride their bike to school.
Yeah, and I think there was also a bus component to it, if I'm remembering properly.
About all the options which are available and how connectivity happens. It was both connectivity and access and safety that you brought up.
Thank you for reminding me. Apparently, it was a good point.
We might want to keep it open because I think the policy where it's addressed is a parking policy specifically. And I know it did come up in the context of parking and probably all of those other contexts also, but there might be a better place for that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I think we know what you're after. We just might need to find the right place to put it. Okay, issue 18 is about lane closures, treating the closures of bicycle lanes the same level of seriousness as closure of vehicle lanes. We are proposing amendments to the code that would strengthen the criteria for closure of ped and bike facilities, specifically looking at safety, convenience, and continuity.
Excellent.
Okay, issue 19 is about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and there's been some conversation between Commissioner Parna and myself about this one subsequent to sending out the packet. I think what we will propose to do is to amend TR 33 to address more broadly electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This also comes up in the climate resilience element in CR 24, but the concept does not come up explicitly in the transportation element.
Commissioner Parna.
I think the fleet electrification part is important. I don't think we should let go of that. It's also in addition to, it's basically public EV charging infrastructure. Because there are, on implementation side, there are going to be a few issues which have to be sorted out on that. So at the TMP level, we are seeing a lot of issues when we implement it on various sites at my day job. So from a perspective of making sure it's there, but then, kind of wrapped correctly is kind of important, so.
Okay. Issue 20 was about event congestion management. I mean, we have a paragraph's worth of response here. That is partly, there's policy that gets at some of this, and that some of this is really they are operational issues and how we operate the system that wouldn't find a good home here in the transportation element.
That's fair. Thank you.
Okay, issues 21 through 23. I'd received communication from Commissioner Aparna that those were okay to be closed. Is there anybody who wants to stop and look at any of them specifically? Okay, and is that the end? That's the end. 23 is the end. The other thing that we can do tonight, if you desire, is just as you've read through the materials, if there's anything else that's come up that you want to just put on our radar as we prepare for the hearing, please let us know. Otherwise, we will proceed to the hearing next week to accept public testimony.
Okay. Anything new? Okay. Then we will proceed to hearing next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to Redmond 2050 Community Development and Design Element Draft 2 Study Session. And Lauren will lead us.
Good evening. Lauren Alpert, Senior Planner, she, her pronouns. Let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Present. How's everyone doing? Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about community development and design element draft 2.0 this evening. So this is, as we've talked about before, an entirely new element. It consolidates the community design element, which was formerly community character and historic preservation, the centers policies, and it adds new sections for inclusive design, for corridor planning. So you've seen a lot of the material that's in it before. It was also in your packet separately tonight, but this is our first time bringing it all together in one document. So some of the policy drivers behind putting together this new chapter and element are really equity, having that transit, and especially equitable transit-oriented development, kind of simplifying and consolidating our policies, and really focusing in the theme of Redmond 2050 and having inclusive design and universal design. And all the other things that our plan is doing, accommodating growth and maximizing housing near high capacity transit routes. So what's new in draft 2? Well, like in all of our drafts, we added a lot of narrative. We consolidated and reorganized our policies. So as we were putting it together, we're like, well, initially we thought this section was going to go here. Well, let's move it here. It may flow better. We strengthened a lot of the language from, consider to you should or shall. We specifically removed a lot of the specifics from the plan. It's late. Bear with me. So we removed a lot of the specifics that were in a lot of that community character chapter previously, because that belongs more in the regulation side. So we wanted to have it broad enough to be a policy. And then we added a lot of clarifications and new policies based on some of the feedback we heard on draft 1, both from the Planning Commission, council, stakeholders, and a lot from our community engagement, and including our engagement with staff. And, everything got new numbers. What else is new? So we also in the interim, as we were working on this draft, we finalized our EIS. So we added all of those new numbers in. We added more definitions for TOD and our centers. We added, incorporated Marymore under those centers policies. So yeah, a lot of the policies are in centers and downtown. We're like, well, let's bump this up to a center-wide policy. This is good for all of the centers. Let's not just limit it to one center. So for example, we had a policy that we had put in downtown for charging e-bikes and other mobility devices. I'm like, well, that's good in all of our centers. Let's bump that up. So, so those are some of the changes that you see in draft 2. So the discussion for this evening, do these changes identified in the attached slide support and promote our themes of equity, inclusion, and resiliency? Do the vision statement reflect our city's vision? And do the accompanying narrative provide clarity and support in related policies? And then also, your other comments and questions are always welcome and appreciated. And I'll be working on the issues matrix for all of your comments as we go. So if I'm staring at my screen as you talk, please excuse me.
Okay.
I'm listening.
All right. Commissioners, comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Russell.
All right, so I really like the way this is shaping up. It looks great overall. I had a few small nits.
Let me pull up the issues matrix.
Yeah, they're very tiny.
Okay.
So one is TOD and the new to me acronym ETOD. I think we all know what that is, but to me reading this, it was like a rare form of jargon. And so I would like, the acronym, I always need to mentally spell out, and I've read it so many times. I've seen other places in other documents and other elements where we've just written out that this is transit-oriented development. And there's been caps, so it's like a nod to the fact that it's a term, but not using it. There was one policy, CTR 12, that actually used TOD or ETOD 4 times in one policy, and it was like a lot of TOD.
Yeah, I think we.
So just a clarity point. Should I go through?
Go.
Okay. I had 2 maps questions. So the one that goes with overlake policies 1 through 6, I think you really need to include a map that shows the overlake, urban multifamily, and OBAT on the map, but that wasn't on the map. There was just the Metro Center versus neighborhood. So the resulting policy, those 6 policies would make more sense with that extra level or a second map. Likewise, on page 18, there was a great map, but the label is way too small to read. So it showed kind of all the downtown zones. And if you know what that is, it's a great, but the label needs to be expanded so that it's actually usable. And then another nit on OV19, expanding the street grid isn't clear wording. I could actually do that one about like 5 different ways in my head, like what that means.
Oh, like the wording is not clear.
Right, so were we saying that we're filling in the street grid as development happens, or are we expanding the roads as development happens?
Which policy was that again?
It was OV19.
Expanding the street grid, okay.
So just, I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but being a little bit more precise with that one. And then the final one was just a comment on Marymore Village, both in the overview and in MV9. There was an allusion to which tribes are interested and affected, but I think it would be more powerful and also useful to specifically list out which tribes we mean. And so I think that's Duwamish and Snoqualmie, but there might be others. And I would also, just in the issues matrix, I would love to know if the city has met with any representatives of those tribes or leaders of those tribes to actually review this policy document, because I really think that they should have an opportunity to weigh in. Like, I don't like having an allusion to representation that is not actually reviewed with anyone that's being claimed to be represented.
It's an MV9.
It was MV9.
Okay, just wanted
And
to-
also in the Marymore Village vision blurb.
Okay.
Commissioner Parna?
I just had a much broader question. I looked at the framework for downtown 1 and 2, and then I looked at the framework policies for Overlake. That's on, I forget the page number. But basically, the downtown policies are clear. You know, there's a land use framework policy, and then there's a design policy. This one seems a bit more like the framework for policy OV1 has 2 different sentences in each. OV1 and OV2 have 2 different sentences, and somehow they, I think either it's overcomplicated or something, but like OV2, the first two sentences don't really kind of mesh. We're talking about development and investments in Overlake, address transportation issues of concern to both Redmond and Bellevue, and then help to retain and enhance a focus on sustainability and resiliency within the area through addition of parks, street trees, and landscaping. So 1, there are 2 different points. And 2, I'm not sure if sustainability and resiliency is about parks, street trees, and landscaping. So I have a little quibble about how that is phrased, because I really liked how it's done in downtown. It's clean, like there's a land use component and there's a design component, right? And like Overlake 1, and for consistency, I think all the centers should have a pattern in terms of their framework policies, however that is. And Overlake 1, FW Overlake 1, OV1 is the public and private investments is sort of understood by saying support Overlake. Sort of, in my head, it's implied, but it could be a supporting policy. Maybe just pull out the second sentence as a, what's the next level policy? Just policies, I guess.
So wait, I just want to make sure I'm clear. The sentence in the framework OV1 could be pulled out as a separate policy
it could be,
underneath.
it's a sort of a policy as part of that framework.
Okay.
When we say support Overlake as a focus for high technology, it is understood that we would encourage public and private investments that reinforce the desired character. So we choose one or the other because it's very, very big for one policy. I don't know why, but I really like the downtown one. It seemed very, hey, you know what? This is what we want to do, and this is what we're going to build, and this is how we're going to build it. It's very clean. I don't know if that helps or hinders. Thank you.
No, it's good to hear it all. Like, who's next?
Anything else?
I mean, I'm
She's building.
I'm creating it right now, so
We're creating.
you will have it for next week if, I mean, I will finish it tomorrow. So it's in your packet for next week. As I feel Ian's eye glaring on me to get the issues matrix done tomorrow.
being created as we speak. You can add to it.
And this, because this is a new chapter 2, we'll be coming back with another draft and a lot more edits too, because we are also continually do community engagement on a lot of these policies.
More things for the issues matrix?
I probably will have more, but I can send that. It's probably wordsmithing comments. So just send it by email as opposed to
Yeah,
broader
if you don't
discussion.
send it tonight, it may not get in the packet for next week, but if it's some wordsmithing stuff, then
Yeah.
we usually kind of lump all those together anyway.
I'll just send it whenever it makes it.
Right. Anything else? All we've got tonight.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Where are we now? Staff and commissioner updates. Ian.
Last night, in this very room, long-range planning staff shared more Phase 2 element policies with the council. And right up top, I want to say that the council was super appreciative of all the hard work that the Planning Commission and staff have invested into this project. Like it was wonderful, and they're very interested in your work, and they appreciate the work. It might be worthwhile to take a little look at the VOD. I think it was a pretty short meeting overall, too. And then the second, this is like highlighted and underlined, we do have a special meeting next week, 31st. TIS knows about it, our visual knows about it. We need to make sure our commissioners know about it. So please let me know if there's anything we can do to support you. It's going to be a tight turnaround for our packet materials, but we will do the best that we can.
And we have a public
Pizza?
hearing. We have a public hearing.
Please let us know.
We have a public hearing next week, so, yes. So we really need quorum. Because if we don't have quorum, we can't hold a public hearing, and then we have to renotice it, and bad. Okay, thanks, Ian. Any commissioner updates? Anybody got any exciting news for us? Okay. Seeing nothing, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, and we are adjourned.